Today, given the week that's in it, we're going to cover the biggest terrorist attack in world history, the attack on 9/11 in America. We're going to cover everything from the build-up to it, going right back to the 1980s as the Soviet wars spurred bin Laden into a key figure in these attacks, right through to the events itself and what unfolded on that unforgettably sad day, to the aftermath, the long-ranging effects that had on the world. This is everything you need to know about 9/11, from the build-up to the attacks, to the aftermath, to the inevitable conspiracy theories surrounding it. I'm Jason Hassett, and welcome to the Jason Hassett Show.
Do it live!
I am not going to exploit.
A Pizza Express in Woking.
Your line of questioning is transphobic.
Now watch this drive.
Fucking thing sucks!
Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Jason Hassett Show, where this week we're going to be covering quite a sensitive topic, especially given the week this is being released. We're of course going to be talking about 9/11, and I want to cover kind of everything around it, the build up to it, like going back to the 1980s, all the way up to the aftermath, the Iraq War and kind of the war on terror afterwards, and go through kind of everything, give a full overview of the situation. So one of the things I want to do in this as well is, I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories around 9/11 too. I don't want to make this all about conspiracy theories, but I think it is interesting to go through the conspiracy theories, what we know as fact, what's been debunked, and what conspiracy theories still linger and why they still linger and so on. I just thought it'd be an interesting deep dive to go into something that I still remember from my childhood in Ireland. Like, obviously nothing compared to the people who are on the ground, be it the victims, the firefighters, the families, etc. But it was such a massive moment in the world for everyone alive at that time. I would have been 12 at that time, 13, I believe at that time. No, 12. I'm right, 12. And I still remember leaving school because of the time difference that afternoon. And it was all over the radio. We got back, it was on the TV, and seeing the second plane hit on the television. And it felt like the world was changing. You know, America was this massive superpower. You know, obviously my parents grew up in Ireland, but even like the Cold War, they kind of knew that at any point that could, you know, become much bigger. And after the Cold War, through the 90s, me growing up, it felt like the world was kind of at peace. You know, wartime was an old thing we didn't really hear about, other than in countries that kind of were always at war, if you wanted. Yeah, so such a pivotal moment. And I just thought it'd be an interesting one to kind of dive into this week. For obvious reasons. So that's it. As always, all of this information has been taken from the interwebs, which is vastly unreliable, but I'm going to hopefully be able to go through it and use my own knowledge of the situation to discuss it properly. I've gotten all of the conspiracy theories around it and so on to discuss as well. And we're going to go through it in chronological order, going back to the 70s and 80s, where, if you want the players in this kicked off, I'm not going to go too into detail in each of the players, and I think that's something we could go into in another episode if you're interested. But the reason I bring up the fact that this could be a little bit, inaccurate at points is because I got it from the interwebs, but mainly just, if there's something here that I've got wrong, or something that you think I've missed that's crucial to the story, please do head down to the comments, put it in there so we can all go through it together and learn something. And I think it's an interesting one to do. And while you're down there, why not hit that like and subscribe button? I really appreciate it, because I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. And I've also decided not to have this one sponsored or with ads for obvious reasons. So let's jump into it. So we start off with the build-up to 2001, to 9/11, and we go all the way back to the 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s, when Soviet-occupied Afghanistan meant that Osama bin Laden joined the anti-Soviet jihad and helped form a support network for Islamic fighters. Remember, this is at the time where the Russians, the Soviets, were expanding into the Middle East, and the Cold War was coming towards its end, but definitely still not there. And the Afghanistan war meant that a lot of Muslim fighters were fighting against, a secular incoming force, if you will. This evolved into al-Qaeda, or the base is what it means in English, after the war, as bin Laden became more radical under Ayman al-Zawahiri's influence. It's sometimes alleged, by the way, that the CIA created bin Laden, but while the US aided the Afghan Mujahideen, there's no evidence of direct CIA support of bin Laden himself. This is supposedly a common myth. One thing I will say as well, I have got like fact checks in here. I noted this the last time. I really dislike the word fact check. As I kind of quote quite a lot, it was during COVID, it really irked me that people were like, we know for a fact. Like, no, what you mean by that is, to the best of our knowledge, there is no evidence to support this, or no critical evidence, no big amount of evidence to support this. So when I say fact check in this, what I mean is there is no concrete evidence to prove this, or to the best of our knowledge, this is what we think at the moment, okay? Before anyone starts shouting all of the things they will inevitably shout in the comments, I just want to make that clear, and I'm happy to talk about anything you think is wrong on that. There was then fatwas against the US because of bin Laden. So in the 1990s, bin Laden grew hostile to the US presence in the Middle East. He caused a 1996 fatwa demanding American troops leave Saudi Arabia. And he also declared a 1998 fatwa with Zawahiri declaring war on the US, calling all Americans legitimate targets. He cited grievances such as US troops in Saudi soil near Islam's holiest sites, and Iraqi civilians suffering under sanctions, and US support for Israel as his reasons for these fatwas. These declarations signaled bin Laden's intent to strike US interests, and there was a lot of hostile feelings towards the US building around this time, especially in the Middle East, mainly because, in recent times, I guess, you have a couple of things going on. Obviously, you have US and UK, like Western elements, backing Israel in a very Muslim area. The Saudis obviously getting quite big there. But, obviously Palestine as well has been quite an issue for quite a long time. But we can get into the Israel-Gaza situation and my feelings on that at a different time. But yeah, obviously for obvious reasons, with a lot of displaced Muslims in the region at the hands of Western organization, there was a lot of anti-Western feelings. And on top of that as well, there was, the likes of old Bush, George H.W., going into Iraq in Desert Storm. So, there's a lot of intervention by the US in that region at the time. And then, a lot of bad feelings against that as well. And a lot of them were fighting against Soviets on one side, US on the other. The Soviets had then collapsed in the 90s, and then they're left with one enemy to fight against after all of this intervention. So there was a lot of Western feeling in that region at the time, and in a lot of the non-Western world at that time, because of interventionism off the back of colonialism and so on. So you can kind of understand it to a point, but this gave bin Laden a perfect opportunity to dive in there and really make a name for himself in the area. As al-Qaeda's anti-US campaigns escalated in the 90s, in February of 1993, there was the first attack on the World Trade Center. A truck bomb was detonated below the World Trade Centers, killing 6 and injuring almost 1,000. It was a plot by jihadists, including Ramzi Youssef, who had links to al-Qaeda. In August of 1998, al-Qaeda bombed US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 224 people. And then in October of 2000, al-Qaeda operatives attacked the USS Cole in Yemen, killing 17 US sailors. These attacks basically were showing that al-Qaeda was trying to hit the US directly and was building up to something big. I guess maybe the US may have thought that, because these had failed, they wouldn't continue on such a large scale. But to me, an attack on a USS ship seems like, an escalation, hitting an actual military asset instead of civilians. But maybe I'm wrong there. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM, Ramzi Youssef's uncle, had proposed a planes operation in the mid-1990s, as in aeroplanes. The foiled Bajinka plot in 1995, which involved bombing airliners and crashing a plane into CIA headquarters, was a precursor to 9/11. In 1996, KSM pitched a grand plan to bin Laden to hijack multiple planes and then crash them into a US landmark. Bin Laden initially felt that this plane attack was too elaborate, but by 1998 or 1999, according to accounts, he approved a scaled-down version of this, focusing on some US East Coast targets. Bin Laden and KSM then began recruiting operatives for this plot. I should point out as well, most of this build-up is taken from investigations after the fact, in case you're wondering. Some of this information was known before the attack, but we'll get into that in a few, I would assume, if I remember from the research. But yeah, a lot of this is known after the fact. Obviously, it would have been a lot easier to stop this if it was known before the fact. But I just want to make that clear in case anyone's wondering, well, they knew all this. Why couldn't? But anyway, bin Laden and KSM's plan, codenamed the Plains Operation, prioritized symbolically important targets. They ultimately selected 4 targets overall. The World Trade Center, which was a symbol of the economy in the West, and especially in the New York financial district, which was center to the world's economy in reality. The Pentagon, which is a symbol of the US and Western military, and either the US Capitol or the White House, which were symbols of political leadership. The mission was intended as a massive, coordinated strike at American power centers. Bin Laden designated Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian engineering student, as the lead hijacker and planner. By 1999, this had all been set in motion. In 1999, a group of radicalized Arab students in Hamburg in Germany, including Mohammed Atta, Marzan al-Shehi, Zayed Jarrah, and Ramzi bin al-Shibi, joined the plot. And I've probably pronounced those names wrong, but here we are. They traveled to al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and were chosen as suicide pilots. Atta and al-Shehi would pilot the World Trade Center planes, Jarrah would pilot the one that ultimately crashed in Pennsylvania, and bin al-Shibi, unable to get a US visa, stayed in Europe as a coordinator and financier. So then the first 9/11 plot operatives to actually enter US soil were Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Minar, both Saudis, who flew into Los Angeles in January of 2000. They had entered an al-Qaeda summit in Malaysia weeks earlier, which the CIA was actually aware of. But the CIA failed to alert the FBI that these extremists had landed in the US. Al-Hamzi and Minar moved then to San Diego, took a few flight lessons, quickly dropping out due to poor English, and even listed their real names in the phone book, which is insane. US intelligence then lost track of them. One of the first major intelligence failures to be highlighted in the aftermath by investigators. By mid-2000, the first key pilots began to arrive from the Hamburg cell to US soil. Mohammed Atta, Marzan al-Shahi, and Ziyad Jarrah all obtained visas and moved to Florida, enrolling in civilian flight school. Over late 2000, they trained on small aircraft in places like Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida, eventually earning pilot licenses. Several additional young men, muscle hijackers, mostly from Saudi Arabia, were recruited to assist in seizing the planes. These operatives entered the US in spring and summer of 2001, posing as tourists or students. Al-Qaeda spent roughly $400,000 to $500,000 to finance 9/11's operations, including travel, flight training, etc. And the funds for this came through international banks, credit cards, and cash couriers who actually carried money overseas. Notably, investigators found no evidence of any foreign government funding 9/11, and the 9/11 Commission stated that no state actors like Iraqi or Saudi officials were behind the financing. Conspiracies about state sponsorship persist. Claims of Saudi royal family members or Pakistani intelligence involvement, but no official inquiries found any proof of this. Couple of quick things on that before we jump into one of the conspiracy theories. is, first of all, $400,000 to $500,000 to fund such a large-scale attack that had such large-scale ramifications is kind of insane when you think about it. Like, even accounting for inflation, it's probably $3 to $4 million, I would imagine, at this point. That's still a crazy small amount of money when you think about it. But I guess that was, I hate to use the word genius, but that was the genius of this operation, was its simplicity and the way it would get round most of the traditional kind of tracking of these terrorist networks. There were a lot of failures on that part, though. And then, obviously, there's the state sponsorship. I think it's fair to say, look, there has been no evidence found of state direct influence, but I can understand why conspiracy theories still float about, because it's hard to think that, this one guy was able to kind of pull this all together without some help from the government to kind of get in touch with, knowing how to work around air traffic control, what response times would be, all that certain things. Maybe I'm wrong there, but it does seem a little bit suspicious given that, tons of state-sponsored actors are involved in anti-US affairs constantly through other actors. Iran with Hezbollah is a perfect example. But, there's constantly state actors involved in these types of things. So I don't know. The first conspiracy theory we'll point out, though, is the Saudi connection. So obviously some point to the fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals and alleged that Saudi authorities may have a hand. Suspicion was fueled by a once classified 28-page section of a 2002 congressional inquiry, which discussed possible links between low-level Saudi officials and the hijackers, e.g. a Saudi expatriate in California who aided Hamzi and Minar. However, these 28 pages were declassified and they showed no smoking gun. And the 9/11 Commission and the FBI have stated that they found no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution funded or knew of the plot. The Saudi role remains controversial in subject matter, but no credible proof has been found of their involvement. I do see why people would link the Saudis to it, though, given that, as I said, 15 of the 90s were Saudi. I do think, though, when you if you want to go for the simplest solution to that, you do need to think that, bin Laden and his family were Saudis. Bin Laden's family had huge money in Saudi, huge contracts in Saudi Arabia. And the Saudi family, like the bin Laden family, were almost royalty in Saudi Arabia at the time. So it's not really surprising that the people who were most vehemently willing to risk their lives for bin Laden would be Saudis. You want to just take the simplest direction for it. And then, of course, the worst part of all this is that the US intelligence agencies did have warnings that al-Qaeda was planning something big, but agencies failed to connect the dots. For example, in July of 2001, an FBI agent in Phoenix warned of a surge of Middle Eastern men taking flight lessons in what was known as the Phoenix Memo, suggesting a terrorist interest in aviation. This memo was ignored in DC on August 6th of 2001. President Bush even received a classified President's Daily Brief titled Bin Laden's Determined to Strike in the US. It warned that bin Laden was planning attacks, possibly hijackings on US soil, but it was vague and mentioned old information and no one acted on it as an imminent alert. Later, the 9/11 Commission cited these unheeded warnings as evidence of a failure of imagination. Simply put, officials just couldn't imagine hijackers or terrorists using airplanes as weapons. A couple of quick conspiracy theories here to note around this time as well. First conspiracy theory is US knew and did nothing, noted as LIHOP. Some argue that the Bush administration or intelligence community let it happen on purpose, LIHOP. They pointed to ignored warnings such as the August 6th PDB, President's Daily Brief, and claimed that officials had advanced warning of 9/11 but deliberately did not stop it. These theories, known as LIHOP, once again, suggest motives like creating a pretext for the war. However, investigators have found no evidence of official foreknowledge or complicity. The prevalent view is that bureaucratic miscommunication and underestimation of the threat, not willful allowance, enabled attackers' success. Even so, numerous intelligence lapses by the FBI and the CIA have kind of fueled this theory. And honestly, I don't think personally, and this is just personally, I don't think 9/11 was an inside job. I think, there's just so much you would need to do there. And as a pretext for war, I think there's plenty of other ways. However, I will say just two things on this. One, it wouldn't be the first time America has planned to do something like this or done something like this. We have the Tonkin incident, for example, and they obviously planned to sink a ship off the coast of Cuba during the missile crisis as well. This has all been declassified. So it wouldn't be the first time. And personally, if there was an inside job, quote unquote, I think the most likely thing would be they just let something happen. But I would say if they just let it happen, I reckon it's a case of they probably weren't aware of the full scale of the situation. That's just my view on it. I don't know. I still amn't convinced personally that it was an inside job, but I think in the most likely incident, it would be more of a let it happen than orchestrate it because of the scale of it. Because if it ever got out that they did orchestrate this, and things have gotten out since about other stuff, they have been quite good about covering up certain things, but yeah, I'm not sure. The other conspiracy theory is that in the days just before 9/11, an unusually high number of put options, bets that the stocks will fall, were put on United Airlines and American Airlines stock, the two airlines whose planes were hijacked, obviously. The odd trading activity led to speculation that some investors had foreknowledge of the attacks. Investigations by the SEC and FBI found innocent explanations for this, e.g. a single US investor unconnected to al-Qaeda had made a large bet against airline stocks, and a newsletter recommendation explained other trades. The 9/11 Commission reported no evidence of insider trading. It's an interesting one. It is a bit bizarre, isn't it? But it's an interesting one. Anyway, by late August of 2001, most of the hijackers were in the US, some having obtained IDs and done practice flights. Teams were assigned to specific flights about 2 to 3 weeks before 9/11. Notably, Mohammed Atta, the ringleader, was in constant communication with bin Laden's coordinators abroad regarding timing. There is evidence that the attackers originally considered dates in early September. By September 5th, all 19 hijackers had arrived in northeastern US and were ready by this point. And then from September 5th to September 10th, several hijackers traveled to Boston, Newark, and Washington, the departure cities for the chosen flights. They bought last-minute flight tickets, sent money to family along with farewell messages. Atta on September 10th took a flight from Maryland to Boston to meet with his team for the next morning's operation. And then a final conspiracy theory to note before the attacks themselves. A complex theory suggests Israeli intelligence had foreknowledge of 9/11. On 9/11, 5 Israeli men, later dubbed the Dancing Israelis, were detained after witnesses saw them seemingly celebrating and filming the World Trade Center attack from New Jersey. They worked for a moving company, Urban Moving Systems. Conspiracy circles claimed they were Mossad agents who knew the attack was coming. The FBI did hold and question them for months, not days, months, but ultimately concluded the men had no advanced knowledge of 9/11. It's true they were Israeli nationals, and one was found with a cash stash and box cutters in their van, but no terror links were found. The owner of the moving company fled to Israel and was suspected of intelligence ties, adding more fuel to the story. While it's likely that the men were engaged in some kind of intelligence, possibly monitoring extremist groups, no evidence shows Israel orchestrated or knew of the advanced attack on 9/11. In fact, several Israeli citizens died in the Twin Towers, debunking false claims that no Israeli or Jewish citizens were victims. Bit insane that it's like, oh, well, we know they were intelligence, but, they probably weren't intelligence. Great research. So then we get to 9/11 itself. The 19 hijackers early on September 11th passed through security at airports in Boston, Washington, Dulles, and Newark for early morning flights bound for California. They smuggled knives and box cutters, then allowed in carry-on luggage and board their planes. Their flights take off between 7:59 and 8:42, and at 8:14 a.m., Hijackers seize American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles and redirect it towards New York. By 8:24 a.m., pilot-trained hijacker Mohammed Atta unknowingly broadcast to air traffic control, "We have some planes," alerting authorities to the hijacking. American Airlines Flight 11, flying at 470 miles per hour, crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center 1 in downtown Manhattan at 8:46. The Boeing 767, carrying 20,000 gallons of jet fuel approximately, strikes between the 93rd and 99th floor of the building. The impact instantly kills hundreds on the plane and inside the building, blasting a burning hole as well in the high floors. People in lower floors and on the ground are stunned. Many assume a freak accident has occurred, and in fact, initial news reports speculated it was a small plane or helicopter. Evacuations from the North Tower begin, and firefighters race to the scene. This I remember hearing on the radio. Hundreds are trapped in the building at this point on the floors above the impact, as all stairwells and elevators in the impact zone are destroyed. Smoke and fire fill the upper floors, and emergency 911 calls from those trapped paint a desperate scene. Building employees in the undamaged South Tower, World Trade Center 2, are initially told to stay put, given the assumption that this was an accident. Then at 9:03, things become obviously worse. As cameras broadcast the North Tower fire, United Airlines Flight 175, which was also going from Boston to LA, suddenly dives into Manhattan and crashes into the South Tower, World Trade Center 2, between the 77th and 85th floors. The impact is captured live on television, and a fireball erupts from the south side of the building. It becomes immediately clear that this is some sort of a coordinated terror attack, not an accident. All aboard the Flight 175 are killed on impact, again along with hundreds inside the South Tower. Both skyscrapers are now burning intensely. New York's mayor and responders realize that an unprecedented disaster is unfolding. Within minutes of this attack, US intelligence agencies are known to suspect that Osama bin Laden is behind this, mainly given he was linked to a 1998 plot to hijack planes and openly threatening the US. The FIA at this point orders all NYC area airports to close. Approximately 9:05 a.m., a famous moment happens when, in Florida, George W. Bush is notified that America is under attack. He remains in the classroom he was in, where he was reading stories with the kids, and then departs to address the crisis. Meanwhile, the Port Authority orders evacuation of all World Trade Center complex buildings. Then at 9:37, the next attack happens. American Airlines Flight 77, going from Dulles to LA, crashes into the west side of the Pentagon. The Boeing 757, traveling at over 500 miles per hour, dives into the building, penetrating the outer three rings and igniting a massive fire. The impact kills all 64 people on board and 125 military and civilian personnel inside the Pentagon. A huge plume of smoke rises from the building, and part of the reinforced building collapses within 30 minutes. Fighter jets scrambled earlier are still en route. Confusion in communication had delayed a clear response. Side note on this as well, this has obviously caused one of the biggest conspiracy theories around 9/11, which is because the Pentagon's facade sustained a relatively narrow breach and only a few large aircraft pieces were visible in photos. Some have claimed that a missile, not a plane, hit the Pentagon, allegedly fired in an inside job. This has been quite extensively debunked, to be fair. Investigators found large aircraft debris at the Pentagon, engine parts, landing gear, as well as the black box. For example, dozens of eyewitnesses saw an American Airlines 757 flying low and smashing into the building, and human remains of the Flight 77 passengers were recovered and DNA matched. Security camera footage, though low frame rate, shows the blur of a jet. So it seems like unquestionably it was a plane that hit the building. I've seen that footage myself. I know it's low quality, low rate, but given the time that's in it, I don't know. Like, and also we saw the footage of the planes hitting the Twin Towers, and we know planes were hijacked. So why then switch out to a missile? It's not really made sense to me in a way when this is basically a flying missile in many ways anyway. That never really made sense to me. At 9:42, for the first time in US history, the FIA grounded all flights in US airspace nationwide. All of them. All civilian aircraft were ordered to land immediately at the nearest airport. In total, over 4,000 planes are guided down over the next couple of hours. Incoming international flights are diverted to Canada. American skies become eerily empty. The shutdown remains unmatched until a brief 2023 incident. Meanwhile, fighters are now patrolling DC and NYC airspace, though the attacks have already occurred. At 9:59 then, the unthinkable happens. The 110-story South Tower, World Trade Center 2, collapses, completely in on itself, causing a massive cloud of dust just 56 minutes after the impact. The building's steel structure, weakened by the jet-fueled fires, gives way. Thousands of tons of concrete and steel cascade down, destroying surrounding structures and raining debris over lower Manhattan. Hundreds of responders and civilians in and around the tower are killed instantly. People several blocks away are engulfed in dust storms and plumes billow throughout New York streets. The World Trade Center buildings were built to withstand normal fires and even a 707 jet impact, but not the combination of damage plus raging jet fuel fires. Steel floor trusses sagged and pulled the exterior columns after burning through their fireproofing, leading to floor-by-floor failure. The South Tower was hit lower and on a sharper angle than the North, so it collapsed first, despite being hit second. Obviously, this has caused one of the biggest conspiracies around this, leading some to argue that pre-planted explosives must have been used. 9/11 truth groups claim the building fell too symmetrically and quickly from fire alone, citing reports of explosions. Professional engineers and the National Institute of Standards and Technology investigated these claims and found no evidence of bombs. The consensus, backed by structural analysis, is that the plane impact severed columns and stripped fireproofing and ensured fires burning at around 1,000 degrees centigrade caused floor supports and columns to fall. Once one floor gave way, enormous weight causes progressive collapse. Thus, this demolition theory is widely rejected by experts. Seismic and audio records also show no evidence of explosives, and the collapse dynamics matched a gravity-driven failure, not an orchestrated blast. So, in short, there's no credible evidence of controlled demolition. Despite internet videos, the towers seem to have collapsed, or seem to, as far as we know, have collapsed due to the planes. And this was concluded by the 9/11 Commission as well. I've seen the internet videos. I get it. I understand why people believe in this conspiracy theory, because it does look like kind of what are blasts coming out in many of those videos. But I do think as well, like, there's a simple explanation for that too. Like, you know, the structure of these buildings is central. So you're going to have like an inward collapse in the center, right? You think about it in terms of like the collapse centrally. And then also as forces are coming down on the building, you're going to have debris ejected by kind of, you know, forces. For something to fill the void coming in, something's going to have to be forced out of the building, if this makes sense. So like if you've got debris and air and fuel and flame rushing downwards, even if it's like a few floors down, you're going to have all that coming through, the interior of the building and then getting forced out at points, which can then look like explosive. I'm not saying that's the argument for it, but in terms of just, playing devil's advocate here and thinking in terms of physics, like if something's collapsing downwards, you're going to have a rush of debris and air coming down like ahead of it as everything collapses. And some of that is going to get kind of blasted out of the building, which could explain some of, that simple debris coming out and looking like explosives further down the building. I get it. Like, I understand how it looked. And even I was a bit like, that looks suspicious. But for me, it's like, there's a simpler explanation here. And we did see a plane hit the building, So, the plane hitting the building alone would have been probably enough to go into Iraq, in my view. Like, you don't need to collapse the whole building. So maybe I'm wrong on this. I never really bought that one. At 10:03, United Airlines 93 flight from Newark to San Francisco never reached the intended target. Instead, it plummets into a field near Shanksville in Pennsylvania after passengers heroically fought back. Aboard Flight 93, hijackers seized the plane about 40 minutes after takeoff, but by then passengers had learned via phone calls about the World Trade Center attack and Pentagon attack. Realizing their plane was part of the plot, passengers led by people like Todd Beamer, who rallied others around it with "Let's roll," stormed the cockpit in a desperate attempt to reclaim the aircraft. The hijackers, pressured by the revolt, crashed the plane before reaching Washington. Unfortunately, all 44 on board died, but countless lives were saved by their intervention. Flight 93 is believed to have been aimed at the US Capitol or White House. Just to note as well, the 9/11 Commission could not definitively name Flight 93's target, but evidence points to the Capitol as the hijackers selected code names like Faculty of the Law for Capitol or Faculty of Fine Arts for the Pentagon. Obviously, there is another conspiracy theory around Flight 93 as well. Some theorists claim the US military shot down Flight 93, citing the wide debris field and engine components found far from the main crash site. Investigators showed large engine pieces landed 300 yards from the impact crater, which was consistent with it bouncing or rolling due to high-speed crash, not a missile. And light debris, paper and insulation was indeed found up to 8 miles away, but they reckon this was blown by the wind after the explosion, not propelled by a missile. Radio transcripts confirmed that although fighter jets were alerted, none reached Flight 93 in time, and Vice President Cheney did authorize the shoot down of Flight 93, but it had already crashed by this point. The evidence strongly supports that Flight 93 was brought down by onboard struggle, not by any missile. I don't know. There's just no real evidence for that one. I think it's possible. But I get why, like, it's a better story that it was heroically taken down, and maybe that's why they push for that. But yeah, I think they would have been pretty quick to say it was shot down anyway. Maybe. I don't know. Also, I think... I'm not sure on that one. The North Tower of the World Trade Center then unfortunately collapses at 10:28 after burning for 102 minutes. This collapse was even more devastating due to the tower's higher impact and longer burn time. The imploding structure and debris utterly destroy the nearby Marriott Hotel and heavily damage surrounding buildings. A massive dust cloud rolls through Manhattan. In the North Tower, Stairwell B miraculously remains partly intact. 11 individuals survive inside it, including 6 firefighters. They were among the only 18 survivors rescued inside the rubble of the Twin Towers. Approximately 1,400 people were still inside or around the North Tower at the time of its collapse, with virtually all of them being killed. The human toll of the Twin Towers collapsing and destruction was enormous. Approximately 2,753 people died at the World Trade Center site, including those in the planes and on the ground. This number encompassed office workers, visitors, airline crew, passengers, and hundreds of first responders who ran in to help. Among those killed were 343 FDNY firefighters and paramedics, 23 New York Police Department officers, and 37 Port Authority police. The largest loss of life of emergency personnel in US history. Lower Manhattan at this point is left in chaos. Other high-profile buildings nationwide are evacuated, like the Sears Tower, UN, Disney parks, etc. Bridges and tunnels into New York City are closed. Civilians covered in ash evacuate on foot. The Twin Tower, an icon of New York skyline, is gone, replaced by a burning pile of debris 10 stories high. At 5:20 p.m., the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7, which had been burning since late morning, also collapses completely in the late afternoon. World Trade Center 7 was a separate building north of the Twin Towers. It had been hit by tons of debris from the North Tower fall, causing damage and igniting fires on multiple floors, and with water mains severed, fires burned unchecked for hours. Unlike the Twin Towers, though, no one was inside. The area was long since evacuated, but the collapse further complicated recovery operations. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 as well has also caused a lot of conspiracy theories. Basically, videos show it dropping suddenly, leading skeptics to allege it was pre-rigged with explosives. They also note that World Trade Center 7 offices housed the CIA, Secret Service, and major NYC emergency bunkers, spinning theories of a planned demolition to destroy secrets. However, this has been extensively debunked over the years. World Trade Center collapses also destroyed or gravely damaged other adjacent buildings, including World Trade Center 3, 4, 5, 6, and Nicholas Church. Fires burned for days under the pile, meanwhile at the Pentagon, firefighters battled inside the blaze for the next day. The Pentagon structural reinforcement, completed in 2001, limited the damage to one sector, although still 189 people perished. In Sharksville, Pennsylvania, a smoldering crater and scattered debris were all that remained of Flight 93. The attacks, though, were finally over. Almost 3,000 people were dead, making it the deadliest terror attack in history. Miraculously, though, the silver lining of all of this, estimates are that upwards of 15 to 20,000 people were evacuated from the Twin Towers and survived due to the relatively lengthy window between impact and collapse for each tower. But for the rescuers and victims' families, the ordeal had just begun. At 7 p.m., President Bush, who had been shuttled to secure bases during the day, returned to Washington. At 9 p.m., Bush addressed the nation from live TV in the Oval Office. He condemned the evil, despicable acts of terror and assured Americans that the government was functioning, and in a remarkable line, he said, "These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve." He vowed to make no distinction between terrorists and those who harbor them, signaling war if nations like the Taliban, which was Afghanistan's regime hosting al-Qaeda, didn't hand over those responsible. As most of you know then, this had long-lasting effects, not only in America, but on the world as a whole. The United States and the world grappled with shock and grief. Ground Zero in New York City smoldered as rescuers searched for survivors. Thousands of tons of steel and debris had to be cleared. Incredibly, a few survivors were pulled from voids in the rubble in the first 24 hours. The last survivor was found the next day on the 13th. Sadly, though, after about 2 weeks, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. No more survivors were found. The final death toll was 2,996 people killed, 2,753 in New York, 184 at the Pentagon, and 40 in Pennsylvania, plus the 19 hijackers. Across America, commercial aircraft remained grounded for days. Major landmarks were closed or under heavy guard. Anxiety of further attacks was high, and thousands of false alarms or bomb scares were reported in the following weeks. Candlelight vigils and memorials took place worldwide. On September 14, 2001, a national prayer service was held at Washington's National Cathedral, and many US allies held their own tributes, including in London. The changing of the guard played the US anthem, and in Ottawa, 100,000 Canadians held a solidarity vigil. And I remember we had, I think, a moment of silence basically every year in the year after, in schools, growing up basically across the country, that every 9/11 in the afternoon, we would have the moment of silence for a few years afterwards. So it was kind of very much felt around the world. On September 12th, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, declared the attacks on the US an attack on all member nations. The first ever invocation of Article 5, collective defense, in NATO's history. This unprecedented step paved the way for NATO countries to support US military actions in response. Within days, the FBI publicly identified the 19 hijackers and confirmed al-Qaeda's responsibility. Investigators swiftly found evidence for this. Mohammed Atta's luggage, for example, which by chance missed the Flight 11 connection in Boston, contained the plotters' names and plans. A car left by hijackers at Boston Logan Airport held jihadist literature and airport maps. And the US government officially asserted Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network as the mastermind for the attacks. Bin Laden initially issued statements denying specific responsibility while praising the attacks, but later in 2004, he openly claimed responsibility. The US Congress nearly unanimously approved a resolution authorizing the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against those who planned, authorized, or committed, or even aided the 9/11 attacks. This broad mandate became the legal basis for the coming war on terror. President Bush addressed Congress on September 20th, 2001, declaring that global war on terror. He demanded the Taliban government of Afghanistan hand over bin Laden and shut down al-Qaeda camps or face attack. The Taliban, an Islamic militia controlling most of Afghanistan, refused to extradite bin Laden. The US, with British international support, launched Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001, attacking the Taliban and al-Qaeda targets. Within weeks, US Special Forces and the Afghan Northern Alliance toppled the Taliban regime in Kabul. Al-Qaeda fighters, including bin Laden, fled into the mountains, notably Tora Bora, in December of 2001, although major combat was quickly over. The Taliban and al-Qaeda remnants regrouped to wage an insurgency, making the Afghanistan war a protracted conflict that would go on to last 20 years. Domestically, the US took drastic steps to prevent future attacks. Air travel saw immediate changes. Reinforced cockpit doors, more air marshals, and by 2002, the creation of the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, to handle airport screening. The government developed new emergency response plans for aircraft threats, and the Patriot Act was passed in late October 2001, vastly expanding law enforcement and intelligence agencies' surveillance power to detect terrorism. A lot of this has obviously caused these conspiracy theories later on because of the overwhelming, far-reaching power of not only the Patriot Act itself, but the NSA's expansion and the TSA's expansion, I suppose. So you can see why it would cause some conspiracy theories, because it gave them these far-reaching powers that had huge consequences. I'm not going to go too deeply into in this video, but I definitely think if you're interested, it would be a fun video. No, maybe not a fun video, but a video of interest to dive into the Patriot Act as a whole later on. This law, while credited with removing information walls between the FBI and CIA, raised civil liberty concerns, as many debated that it went far too far in sacrificing privacy for security. In November 2002, the Homeland Security Act was signed, creating the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. DHS consolidated 22 agencies from INS to FEMA into a cabinet department focused on preventing terror attacks, border security, and disaster preparedness. This was one of the largest government reorganizations in US history, directly spurned by 9/11. The collapse of the Twin Towers spread toxic dust across Lower Manhattan in the aftermath of the event. The EPA officials mistakenly assured the public that the air was safe, a decision which was later criticized. And in reality, the dust contained pulverized concrete, glass fibers, asbestos, lead, and chemicals, a hazardous mix. In the months of cleanup, Ground Zero wasn't fully cleared until 2002. Thousands of responders and volunteers were exposed. Over the years, many developed chronic illnesses, respiratory diseases, PTSD, and cancers. And by 2008, over 10,000 people were diagnosed with 9/11 related cancers. Congress did, to be fair, eventually fund health monitoring and compensation, the Zadroga Act of 2010, named for an NYPD detective who died from Ground Zero illnesses. The Victim Compensation Fund, initially opened in 2001-2004, was later extended to cover these ongoing health impacts. So those were some of the immediate aftermath effects of 9/11. And then in September of 2002, under pressure from 9/11 victims' families, the Jersey Girls and others, Congress established the 9/11 Commission, an independent and bipartisan panel to investigate the attacks. This was chaired by Governor Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton. The commission interviewed over 1,200 people and reviewed millions of documents over 1.5 years. In July 2004, the 9/11 Commission report was published. It detailed the events and identified failings. And the report also made recommendations to create a Director of National Intelligence to coordinate agencies, which was done in 2004, and overhaul congressional oversight of intelligence. The Commission's report unequivocally placed blame on al-Qaeda and named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed as the principal architect behind 9/11. It debunked many conspiracy theories that had come up early on, like Iraqi involvement, citing that there was no collaboration found between al-Qaeda and Iraq. It did, however, highlight how al-Qaeda had repeatedly slipped past US radar due to interagency turf wars and underestimation of warnings. The most extreme theory, which is MIHOP, made it happen on purpose, claims 9/11 was orchestrated or permitted by elements in the US government as a false flag operation to justify wars or new domestic controls. Advocates of this theory point to the rapid identification of culprits, alleged military stand-down, and neoconservative think tank documents. For example, a 2000 PNAC paper noting a new Pearl Harbor might speed up their agenda. These claims often allege Vice President Cheney, good old Dick, or others were involved in planning the attacks or allowing them. It must be said, no credible evidence supporting this has been found. Multiple official investigations by the FBI, CIA, Inspector General, and 9/11 Commission, and independent reviews have wholly rejected claims of US complicity. I will say, as I did say before, I understand why there is the suspicion, though, given, as I said, it wouldn't be the first time America has done or planned something like this. Just to put that out there. But I do think it needs to be said that there isn't credible evidence of it that has convinced me, at least. Maybe you guys watching think differently. But, I can understand why there is the suspicion. One specific controversy around the aftermath, though, is the US Air Defense, or NORAD, was unprepared for hijacked planes to be used as missiles. Only 14 fighter jets were on alert across the continental US that morning. The entire US. War game exercises running that day initially caused some confusion with false radar injects, but fighters were scrambled once the hijackings were known. Conspiracists claim NORAD was ordered to stand down to let attacks happen. In reality, the hijackers turned off their transponders, so air control had great difficulty tracking the planes among thousands of radar blips. Communications between the FAA and NORAD was slow and improvised. By the time the fighters were airborne, the attacks were already over. So the 9/11 Commission found no evidence of any stand-down order. In the wake of 9/11, there was an outpouring of global sympathy for the US. Many countries offered support in intelligence and military efforts. However, the US wars in Muslim-majority countries expanded. Afghanistan, obviously, and then Iraq in 2003. Resentment grew in some of the world. Domestically, American Muslims faced increased suspicion and instances of harassment or hate crimes. President Bush visited a DC mosque on September 17th of 2001, urging that Islam not be equated with terrorism. Despite this, the era saw debates on balancing security with civil rights, including concerns over profiling and detention of hundreds of Arabs. Obviously, as well, there was long-term consequences of 9/11, not just those short-term ones. Most notably, the Iraq War, which kicked off in 2003 in March. While not directly linked to 9/11, the Bush's administration, justified it partly by asserting that Saddam Hussein's regime was gathering a threat that could give weapons of mass destruction to terrorists. Notably, no weapons of mass destruction were found, and Iraq was found to have no role in 9/11, making the war highly controversial and viewed as a diversion from the war on al-Qaeda. It became a prolonged conflict, as you guys probably know. Also, though, in March 2003, KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the operational mastermind of 9/11, was captured in Pakistan. KSM and several al-Qaeda accomplices were later transferred to US military prisons in Guantanamo Bay of Cuba after years in custody and being subjected to waterboarding and other enhanced interrogation attacks. I've always loved that, enhanced interrogation. I love when you put these like real sterile names to like crazy things. Not saying KSM didn't, but many of the people who got this enhanced interrogation definitely didn't deserve it. But this sparked legal debates. KSM and 4 others were charged with capital crimes for 9/11, and as of 2025, their trials have still not been completed, dragging on due to legal complexities. From 2002 to 2025, many other al-Qaeda figures were killed or captured worldwide with global intelligence cooperations. Osama bin Laden himself was eluding capture for nearly a decade after 9/11, but finally on May 2nd, 2011, US Navy SEALs located and killed bin Laden in a covert raid on his compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan. His death was a significant milestone, providing some closure for the 9/11 families. A trove of al-Qaeda documents recovered in the raid further confirmed bin Laden's role as a plot instigator. But I'm not going to go too much into that because 1, it's a full episode in itself, and 2, I think personally, the guys I work with over at Camp Gagnon have already done a great one of kind of a similar video like this, one of their great 10 talks on bin Laden. So I can link that in the description below if you'd like, or in the comments or whatever. Shout out Mark, love you, man. But obviously that's the entire thing. The World Trade Center itself was rebuilt over the years, and in 2011, on the 10th anniversary, the National September 11th Memorial was opened at Ground Zero, and a 9/11 museum was opened in 2014, preserving artifacts and testimonies, and a new skyscraper was eventually One World Trade Center, Freedom Tower, built and opened in 2014, standing 1,776 feet tall. Obviously, that's the year of independence for America, and stands as a tribute to them. So, yeah, obviously there's been lots of ongoing effects and so on, which we could get into, but maybe a different time, like the war in Afghanistan, the long-scale regime change, and all of that. But that has essentially been, it covered the build-up to the attacks themselves, and the aftermath. A day that, I don't want to say lives in infamy, but I guess really does. Especially because, as an Irish guy living in Ireland as a teenager, well, just about to be a teenager at the time, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I can only imagine how people in New York and the victims and so on feel. Just a horrible, horrible day for every reason. For the people who died on the day, and then the aftermath where, obviously, people in Afghanistan were killed who had nothing to do with this as well. Same in Iraq. Innocent people are always tarnished by evil people, unfortunately. I should really think of a nicer, more eloquent way to put that. But, unfortunately, in all of these situations, a few evil people caused thousands and thousands of innocent people to be killed. And yeah, just a horrible, horrible day. And on that drastically sad note, thank you for watching. Please do subscribe. And like I said, if there's anything I've missed, anything you think we should go into for another episode, or anything you'd like to add, the comments are below and I read them all, so check them out. And I'll see you next week for another Jason Hassett Show.
Do it live!
I am not going to exploit you.
A Pizza Express in Woking.
Your line of questioning is transphobic.
Now watch this drive.
Fucking thing sucks!